I woke up before the sun. It was as if time was at rest, suspended between two sighs of the universe. The sky was still a dark cloth stitched with shy stars, and the light of the new day only whispered promises outside the half-open window. Didn't know why I had woken up. I just felt that it was time to open my eyes. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not an absolute silence, the kind that weighs on your chest, but a rare, peaceful kind. A silence that caressed your ears, as if the world were waiting for you kindly. It was like being wrapped in cotton wool, floating between dreams and reality, my heart beating slowly, as if it had time. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, where soft shadows danced like ancient memories. A cool breeze came through the window, bringing the scent of dewy trees. I took a deep breath, as if every cell in my body wanted to hold on to that air. I stood up slowly, trying not to disturb the harmony of the moment. My feet touched the cold floor with unusual delicacy, and I felt light, not in body, but in soul. It was as if something in me had been left behind during the night, something I didn't yet understand, but it didn't scare me. On the contrary, it gave me a strange sense of peace. I walked to the window. Outside, the world seemed untouched. The garden was still asleep, with the flowers closed like little secrets. The sky, in shades of deep blue, was beginning to lighten at the edges, as if the dawn was slowly painting a new hope. Nothing moved in a hurry, not the wind, not the clouds. It was as if time was also waiting for me to wake up completely. I looked around the room with new eyes. Everything was in its place, but there was something different about it. The objects had a softer, almost ethereal glow. My favorite chair looked more inviting than ever before. The grandfather clock on the wall read 6:13, but its ticking had stopped. Curious. But instead of making me feel uneasy, it gave me a sense of eternity, as if that moment could last as long as I wanted. I sat down on the bed again, just to observe. Nothing seemed to require rushing. No notifications, no traffic noise, no urgency. Just me, the soft sound of the leaves outside, and the silence that lay beside me like an old friend. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling my own breathing, slow, deep, full. It was as if my body knew I needed that rhythm to start the day, or to continue dreaming, perhaps. I wondered if I was truly awake, but decided it didn't matter. This reality, whatever it was calm, and that was enough. I stood up again, this time with more intention. Each step seemed to float above the floor. As I passed the mirror, I noticed something subtle. My reflection seemed more distant, not in appearance, but in presence, as if there were a thin layer of fog between me and the glass. Still, I recognized myself, and I smiled, because somehow that feeling of being less present didn't worry me. It freed me. The whole house seemed asleep, the furniture still, the walls silent. But there was no sadness in it. There was poetry, a kind of solitude that doesn't hurt, just embraces. I walked to the hallway door and opened it slowly, as if asking permission from the room. The air outside was even cooler. The wooden floor beneath my feet made no sound. Everything was too soft to disturb. I walked as if I were floating through the very memory of the house. I knew that at some point I would see my family. But for now, I just wanted to walk, to feel. It was the kind of morning that begins not with noise, but with feeling. And I, more than ever, was willing to feel everything, every texture of light, every whisper of the wind, every void filled with meaning, and perhaps you who are listening to my voice now can do the same. Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe. Listen to the silence around you, or within you. And tell me, when was the eyes? Last time you woke up in peace? If you want, share it in the comments. Sometimes, sharing silence is also a way of connecting. The hallway stretched out before me like a pastel-colored memory. The soft morning light was beginning to slip through the cracks in the windows, tinting the walls with a shy gold, almost too shy to wake anyone. There was something enchanting about that stillness, not the kind of silence that weighs you down, but the kind that cares, that cradles you, that wraps around you like a warm blanket. Each step was like a musical note, of a song that only I could hear. The pictures on the wall seemed to watch me sweetly, like old friends who knew stories that I had forgotten. Everything seemed familiar, and at the same time, different. It wasn't the environment that had changed. It was me. I could smell the coffee coming from the kitchen. It was so real, so present, that for a moment I braced myself for the clink of cups, the sound of a spoon stirring sugar, the muffled laughter of my wife distracted by her own thoughts. But nothing. The smell was there, strong, comforting. But the sounds. No. I paused at the kitchen door, hesitant. There was a kind of beauty in not knowing what I would find, an invitation to contemplation. I ran my hand lightly along the door frame, feeling the cool but alive wood. Everything there pulsed in silence. When I entered the kitchen, I saw the coffee maker still hot. Steam danced in the air in lazy swirls. My wife's favorite cup was on the table, the one with blue flowers, with the handle a little chipped. The chair in front was empty, but I could feel that she had been there not long ago. Her presence still lingered in the air like a perfume that refused to fade. I walked to the window and looked outside. The garden was still slowly waking up. The leaves trembled slightly in the wind as if they were stretching. The sky, brighter now, seemed to welcome each movement of the morning with tenderness. And yet, there was something strange, a too quiet delicacy. I turned my eyes back to the inside of the house. The details called to me. The cloth on the sink, the chair slightly pulled back, the half slice of bread on the plate. Small clues to a routine that was still going on, even without me. And perhaps that was the most curious thing. Life seemed to go on, but at a different pace. As if it were respecting my pace, my time. As if it was letting me observe without rushing. I walked into the living room. The rug beneath my feet made no sound. The couch felt more comfortable than I remembered. Everything about this morning had a different weight, not a weight of sadness, but of presence, of meaning. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my body leaning forward, as if waiting for something to happen, but without anxiety, just paying attention. I looked around and felt longing. Not a painful longing, but a gentle longing. Like when you see an old photo and smile without meaning to. Then I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. My heart beat differently, not with fear, but with calm anticipation. I saw my wife appear in the doorway of the living room. She walked slowly, as if she too felt the world lighten up. She had a blanket over her shoulders and was holding a cup in her hands. Her eyes were downcast, thoughtful, and yet there was peace in her. A serenity that lit up the space. She walked past me. Very close, so close that I almost touched her hand. But she didn't see me, and there, in that moment, something inside me understood. Not everything, but enough. It wasn't a shock or a start. It was a whispered acceptance, like when you hear a song and you know it's coming to an end, but you still smile because you've heard it. I stood there, looking at her for a few more minutes. I felt gratitude for seeing her, for being there, for that moment. I didn't need to understand anymore. I just needed to feel. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The peace that enveloped me was so profound that it could have lulled me back to sleep. And maybe that was what the world wanted from me at that moment. For me to rest. For me to just observe. And now, maybe you can do this too. Close your eyes for a moment. Listen to the small sounds around you. The distant sound of a car, the gentle hum of the wind, maybe even the sound of your own heart. Have you ever had a moment when everything seemed strange, but at the same time? Right? If you feel like it, share it in the comments. Maybe you too are awakening to something new. I got up from the couch without rushing, as if my body didn't need any effort to move. The blanket covering the upholstery slid gently, as if giving me space, as if respecting my time. My feet touched the floor, and once again, I heard nothing. No noise, no creaking of the wood. Just the echo of silence. I began to walk around the house as if I were walking in a dream. Each step was light, almost suspended. It was as if the floor was taking my weight, as if it were saying to me, "You are here, but you don't need to be." Present. That didn't bother me. On the contrary, the absence of sound made everything more intimate. I walked down the hallway again. I looked at the pictures on the walls. The frame with our wedding photo was still there. She was smiling with her eyes. I was in my suit, my hands sweaty, nervous but happy. That day seemed like it had happened yesterday, or maybe today. It was hard to tell. The memories had lost the weight of time. They just existed. As I touched the painting with my fingertips, something curious happened. I didn't feel the stiffness of the wood, nor the cold glass. I felt a memory, as if the touch awakened something inside me, an emotion that had come from far away but arrived intact. A calm warmth ran through my chest, and I stood there for a moment, allowing it to pass through me. I kept walking. On the opposite wall was the mirror, a large antique mirror with a gilt frame, a wedding gift. I always thought it added character to the house. I moved closer. My reflection was still there, but again it seemed distant, not out of focus, but as if there were a thin layer of glass between us, as if I were looking at a memory of myself. I raised my hand, slowly. In the reflection, the gesture was repeated, but with a slight delay. Almost imperceptible, but it existed. I smiled, and the reflection smiled back. But there was something in his eyes, an old tiredness, a peace that only appears after having felt it for a long time. I turned my face to the side and left the mirror behind. I walked into my son's room. The door was ajar, as it always was when he was asleep. I pushed gently, as if I was afraid of waking him, but he was already awake. He was there, sitting on the floor, surrounded by toys scattered around in the typical disorder of childhood. His hair was messy, his shirt was a little askew, and he had that curious look that always disarmed me. He was playing with his cars, making sounds with his mouth, inventing stories. But something caught my eye. In the center of the mess, there was a small spaceship made of building blocks. It was the same one we had built together a week before. I walked closer. He looked so focused. I tried to say something, but my voice wouldn't come out. Or maybe it did, but it didn't carry. I stayed there, kneeling beside him, watching him play. For a moment, he stopped moving the cars. He looked in my direction. And, for a second, I swear he saw me. His eyes widened, but not in fright. It was more like recognition, like when you see someone you know in a dream. He was quiet for a few seconds, and then, as if he didn't know what he felt, he went back to playing. The ship flew again. The blue car crashed into the imaginary pole, and his voice invented sounds and speeches with that childish enthusiasm that only children have. I sat on the floor, saying nothing. I just watched. And in that shared silence, something beautiful happened. It was as if we were together, even though we were separated by something I couldn't name. And that was enough. I stood there for a few minutes, or hours, or maybe neither. As I was leaving, I looked back and saw something that touched me. He looked in the direction where I was and whispered, "Daddy," in a low voice, almost like a memory. I embraced that word inside me, and it stayed there, warming everything. I walked through the house again, and my footsteps remained silent. But now I realized that this was not absence, it was lightness. It was the world saying, "You can continue, but now in silence." And you, who are here with me, listening to this story, have you ever felt like you were present, but invisible? Have you ever had a moment where everything seemed too calm to be real and yet too comforting to deny? If something like this has touched you, share it in the comments. Sometimes the stories we live in silence are the most profound of all. I left my son's room with my heart filled with something difficult to explain. It was neither sadness nor joy. It was presence, a feeling of living in a moment that would not be repeated, but that also did not need to be repeated. A moment that was enough in itself. I walked slowly into the living room, guided by the soft light that spilled through the curtains. The day was already bright, but the house was still immersed in that same dreamlike atmosphere. As if each environment was soaked in liquid, dense and welcoming silence. The room was exactly as I remembered it. The brown sofa with its awkward cushions, the bookshelf with its crooked books, the slightly misaligned picture frames, and the high, old corner lamp that only worked when it wanted to, and today it didn't seem to want to. But it all sounded beautiful to me, like an old memory that doesn't have to be perfect to be loved. My wife was sitting there, in the corner of the sofa. Her legs were crossed, a blanket draped over her knees. She was holding a cup in both hands, staring into space with a slight smile, the kind of smile she gave when she was deep in good thoughts. The steam from the tea was rising slowly, as if she were reflecting on it too. I stood there, just watching. There was no rush. I could watch her as much as I wanted. Her face was a little more tired than I remembered, but also more serene, as if she had learned to live with what was missing, to embrace the emptiness with delicacy. That moved me deeply. She picked up a photo that was on the table next to her. A picture of us. The day we moved into that house. We were hugging, with paint on our faces, and that look of someone who was just starting out. I saw her eyes fill with tears, not of pain, but of good longing. A longing that comforts, that warms. I wanted to get closer. Say something, touch her hand. But my feet hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect. That was her moment, and I didn't want to interrupt. So I sat down in the armchair across the room, the same one that was always mine, and I sank into it like someone returning to the body of an old friend. I still had my shape. It still belonged to me. And for a moment, I felt like it was all still mine too. The house, the family, the time. She stood up shortly after and walked slowly to the bookshelf. She ran her fingers through the books as if searching for something. She chose one of them, one of my favorites. The novel I had read 3 times and still cried at the end. She opened it to the first page and stood there, staring at the words. She didn't read it out loud, but her eyes spoke. I knew exactly what she was remembering. It was the passage I recited to her by heart on cold nights. I whispered softly, even without knowing if my voice would penetrate any barrier. And if it all ends now, may it end like this, with a full heart and a soul at peace. She smiled, slightly, as if she had heard, or felt. Maybe in that moment, our connection had broken the rules. Maybe love doesn't need physical presence to exist. Maybe it just lingers, hovering, warming, embracing, even in silence. The morning light touched her face sweetly, and I understood that that room, once full of life, noise, footsteps, and voices, had now become a temple of memories, a place where time didn't flow, it just moved slowly, and where everything that once happened still echoed softly through the walls. I stood up. I took one last look around. The bookshelf, the armchair, the still steaming cup, the photo frames with smiles stuck in time. And I felt grateful, because even though I was far away, I was there. And you, who are with me now, is there a place in your house that stores more than just objects? A corner, a chair, a photo? Something that carries stories, affection, presence? If you want, share it in the comments. Sometimes, sharing these little relics of everyday life can bring out the most beautiful thing, the permanence of love in the simple things. I left the room as if carrying a living memory with me. My body moved, slowly, guided more by sensation than by space. The sounds of the morning were still absent, but the silence was no longer empty. It seemed full, filled with subtle presences and gentle memories. Each step was a caress in time. I walked back into the hallway and smelled a familiar scent, cereal with milk. It was the smell of Sunday mornings, of hurried laughter and the television, playing cartoons. I followed the scent as carefully as one would follow the trail of a forgotten song. And there he was. My son sat on the dining room rug, exactly where he always preferred to play. Toys were scattered around him, cars, building blocks, superhero action figures, a colorful chaos that to him made perfect sense. He was concentrating on something. His face was slightly tilted, his tongue between his teeth, as he always did when he was serious about some childish mission. He carefully fitted two large pieces together, trying to build a sort of tower. In the background, the TV was on without sound, showing a cartoon. The characters were jumping and smiling, but the scene seemed isolated from the world. I approached him silently, as I had been doing since early morning. I knelt down next to him. The carpet still bore the marks of our moments, of the afternoons when we lay side by side, creating imaginary worlds. That was our place, our little universe where anything was possible. I observed every detail. His bare feet, his socks tangled in the corner, his hair falling over his eyes. He was so absorbed in his play that the whole world seemed to fit into that tower that he was slowly climbing, piece by piece. I tried to speak. A whisper. "Hi, my little one." But as before, my voice did not reach him. Still, I stayed there, watching, feeling. At one point, he stopped. He looked up. His eyes, brown like mine, searched for something in the air. For an instant, they met mine. And even if it wasn't literal, I felt it. He saw me, or felt my presence. It's hard to explain. It wasn't a rational recognition, but a bond, as if my silence embraced him from within. He picked up one of the cars, the red one, our favorite, and pushed it slowly toward me. Of course, he couldn't really see me, but the direction was just right. The car stopped right in front of me, gently touching my leg. Such a simple gesture, so powerful. I was moved. I picked up the cart gently, even though I knew he wouldn't see it. And in that invisible gesture, something warmed me. There we were, once again, sharing the same moment, without words, without touching, only the love that runs through everything. He smiled to himself and went back to building the tower. Each block he fitted together seemed to carry the lightness of childhood. And in that absent-minded smile, I saw a part of me, something that continues to live, even if the body no longer follows. Because love, that one, continues. It does not depend on physical presence. It settles in small gestures, in subtle glances, in carts pushed into nothingness. I watched for a few more minutes. Then I slowly stood up. I looked at the carpet, at the toys, at him, and I thought, he will grow up. He will remember these mornings as soft echoes. Maybe one day, when he is an adult, he will walk into a room, smell cereal, and think of me, and smile. Even if he doesn't understand why. Maybe that's what love is, what remains when everything else passes away. And now I ask you, calmly, in this silence shared between my voice and your rest, do you remember a moment from your childhood that you never knew how to explain, but that warmed you inside? Maybe a smell, a sound, a scene, something that made you feel protected? If you want, share it in the comments. Sometimes, sharing a memory is like leaving a car parked in someone's world. I walked up the stairs slowly, not really knowing why. My feet, still light, stepped on steps that seemed to float. Each step was a memory that didn't hurt, an invitation to revisit time, not the time of hours, but the time of feeling. That time that is kept in the heart, not on the clock. When I got upstairs, the first sound that came to mind was the ticking that used to fill that space. The antique clock on the wall, an heirloom from my grandmother, was always there. Was large, heavy, made of dark wood, and had a yellowish-white face. I thought it was beautiful. My wife said it was creepy. And my son said it made thought noises. I looked at him now. It was still, motionless, silent. The frozen hands read exactly 2:47. That hour was familiar to me. So familiar that my breathing deepened. I remembered. It was the time I heard the last sound in the house last night, the time everything went quiet, the time when, without knowing it, something in me said goodbye to the world as it was. I approached the clock reverently. I ran my fingers over the wood. The surface seemed to absorb my touch, as if it were alive, or rather, as if it still remembered me. As if it recognized me. 47, an ordinary number. But now it seemed fixed in eternity. I looked around. The hallway was silent, but full of presence. The window in the background let in a diffuse, almost golden light. The picture frames on the walls seemed to observe me in silence, like witnesses who prefer not to interrupt what is being understood. Time was no longer running, and strangely, this didn't scare me. It brought me comfort. As if, by stopping, the clock had decided to immortalize an instant that is worth keeping alive. I sat down on the wooden bench under the window. That bench where I used to leave the Eames books I couldn't finish, and where sometimes I would sit and listen to the rain. Outside, it wasn't raining, but the sky had a hue that promised calm, a faded blue of late afternoon, even though it is morning. Maybe, in that place where I was, now the hours would mix together, get mixed up, or simply stop mattering. I looked at my hands. They were there, equal, but with a slight transparency that I couldn't explain. A kind of inner light surrounded them. And yet, everything seemed normal, as if that was the next stage of something that had always been inside me. I looked back at the clock, and this time, I didn't just see the face. I saw my own reflection in the glass, a calm reflection. My eyes were calmer than ever, and I understood in that moment that it wasn't time that had stopped. It was me, not in the sense of an end, but of a pause, a necessary pause, a deep breath between one life and another, between one role and another. As if the universe were saying, now you can just observe, just feel. And I allowed myself that. I stood there for long minutes, without trying to change anything, not wanting to go back, nor continue, just be. Because sometimes the most precious moment in life happens when you stop trying to control it, when you accept the now, even if it's different, even if it's silence. And maybe, if you're hearing my voice right now, it's a good time for that too. Can you remember the last time time stopped for you? Not with the hands, but with the soul. A moment when everything slowed down and only presence remained? If you want, tell me in the comments. Sometimes, when time stops, it is just inviting you to look at what you have never seen. I continued to sit on that bench under the window, watching the sky that, even though still, seemed to breathe. The air around me was warm, calm, almost thick, as if each molecule carried the sound of a sigh. The house, still quiet, seemed to hear me, and I, for the first time in a long time, heard my own inner silence. That's when they came. The memories. Not like a disorderly whirlwind, but like a silk thread, unraveling slowly, one by one, like drops of memory touching my skin. Soft, delicate, unhurried. The first one came without an image, just sound. My son's laugh at 5 years old when I threw him in the air and caught him back in my arms. That laugh full of confidence, of someone who knows that no matter how high they go, their father will always be down there, waiting with open arms. Then, a rainy afternoon. My wife and I in the kitchen, dancing without music while dinner burned on the stove. The smell of forgotten food, the nervous laughter, the tight hug. A moment of no practical importance, but eternal in the soul. The memories weren't complete scenes. They were fragments, textures, temperatures, feelings. Like the warmth of the sun on a spring Sunday as I mowed the lawn in the backyard and watched my son running in socks on the wet ground. He fell. He cried. And he ran to me. I hugged him, without saying anything, and he stopped crying just because he felt safe. These memories, so simple, so everyday, emerged as if the house itself were whispering them to me. As if each wall, each piece of furniture, each staircase had engraved in its essence small chapters of our history. I remembered a smell, lavender. My wife's perfume as she walked through the living room on her way to work. I pretended to keep reading the paper, but I took deep breaths just to catch a whiff of her scent. I remembered the sound of my son's footsteps running down the hallway when he came home from school, eager to tell me something. How he would always start with, "Dad, guess what?" I remembered the night it rained heavily, and the power went out. We lit candles and made shadows on the walls with our hands. The room became a cave, the sheets became cabins, and our routine turned into an adventure. We laughed so much that we forgot about the storm outside. I stood there, with my eyes closed, reliving those scenes that no longer belonged to the world of the living, but that never stopped living inside me. And I understood, at that moment, that time can take away many things, but it never takes away what was truly experienced. Gentle memories are like that. They don't come screaming. They touch lightly. They don't demand. They don't hurt. They embrace. They console. They say, "You lived, and that's enough." And at that moment, something inside me opened, like a window that had never been opened before. And what came in was not wind nor light. It was understanding. That my time in this house, in this family, in this life, had left its mark. And even if I were now on another plane, none of it would be forgotten. I slowly got up from the bench, like someone respecting the end of a song. I ran my hand over the frame of the stopped clock, and, before going down the stairs, I turned one, last time to the hallway, the one that held so many moments that I never photographed, but that remained engraved in me more strongly than any image. I felt peace. And now, looking inside myself, I understood that longing can be a place where we live for a while, not to suffer, but to rest with what was good. And maybe you have a memory like that too. What is the fondest memory you have of someone who is no longer physically present? The one who, even without noise, still touches your chest tenderly. If you want, share it in the comments. Sometimes our memories, when spoken quietly, become invisible bridges between distant hearts. I went down the stairs with the ease of someone who is neither in a hurry nor in any obligation. The railing still bore the paint marks from the last renovation, made by small hands that insisted on helping. I felt the texture under my fingers, and for a moment I imagined my son painting with the crooked brush, grimacing in concentration. Smiled alone. It was like touching time with your fingertips. The kitchen was lit by a warm light coming in through the side window. The table was the center of the space, as it always had been. Simple, made of light wood, with 4 chairs and signs of use on the top. Cutlery marks, small stains, a scratch that appeared after an accident with grape juice. But what caught my attention the most were the dishes. 3 plates were placed on the table. The cutlery was lined up, the glasses were upside down. There were even napkins folded carefully, as if they were concerned with the smallest details even on ordinary days. But there was something strange, subtle, and yet impossible to ignore. My plate was not there. I stood there for a moment, just watching. There was no food, no strong smell in the air, just the faint scent of freshly used detergent and an almost palpable stillness. The refrigerator emitted that low, steady hum, so familiar that it almost blended into silence. I sat upright against the wall, near the window. From there, I could see the table from a familiar angle. It was where I used to sit when I came home late. I would watch my family eat dinner, sometimes not wanting to interrupt, just wanting to watch. It was a habit of mine, to feel the moment before I participated in it. But now, watching was all I could do. My wife appeared shortly after, with calm steps. She was wearing an apron that she rarely wore. She was carrying a plate of rice and vegetables, and she carefully placed it in front of our son, who soon came running, with a toy in his hand and his hair still messy. They sat down. They talked among themselves. The sound of her voice was soft, as it always was. He spoke enthusiastically, swinging his legs under the chair, and I was there, watching. It was a beautiful scene, complete, but with a delicate emptiness, an absence. That didn't hurt, but that hung heavy in the air like a colder breeze. No one mentioned my name, but there were pauses, little pauses, the ones where, before, I would have said something, and now there was just silence. My wife picked at her plate with less appetite than usual. The boy asked her questions, and she answered with affection, but with distant eyes. She was there, but also somewhere else. He looked for a moment at the empty seat, the seat that was usually mine. There were no tears. There was no drama. Just a look that said more than any words, a look that contained remembrance, gratitude, and an attempt to accept what cannot be changed. I approached slowly. I stood at the side of the table, watching them so closely that I could almost feel the heat from the dishes. And then I realized, even though I wasn't physically present, my absence was still part of that meal. I still occupied a place. They continued, as they should have. And this was not a breakup. It was a continuity. Because love, even when absent, shapes routines. It remains in the spaces it left behind. I looked back at the plate that wasn't there, and I imagined that, in their hearts, it still existed, invisible but present, untouchable but remembered, and I accepted. Perhaps the most beautiful type of love is the one that does not require presence to continue existing. The one that lives in repeated gestures, in the empty chairs that remain reserved, and in the silences that no one tries to fill. And now, I invite you to remember with me, what absence taught you the most about what true love is? If there is someone or some moment that still lives in you, even after they've left, share it in the comments. Sometimes, writing about it is like preparing a dish for someone who can no longer sit at the table. but still lives at the banquet of our memory. After they finished dinner in silence, that silence that doesn't suffocate, but rather guards, my wife carefully collected the plates. My son ran back to his toys as if he knew that childhood is all about rushing, even when the world demands calm. I observed the entire scene like an old acquaintance who no longer needed to interfere. Just feel. And then the rain came. It started with a whisper, a timid sound, like light fingers touching leaves. Then it grew louder, spreading across the roof like a slow, soothing melody. The sound brought back memories as old as the house itself. Rain had always held a special place in my days. It was my favorite soundtrack. Whenever it fell, something inside me felt at ease. I went to the balcony, that covered porch with the iron chairs and the floor that only got wet halfway. That's where I would sit on rainy nights, wrapped in an old blanket, watching the quiet world. Not to escape from life, but to touch it without noise. I rested my hands on the railing, which still had small rust marks where my son had placed his feet. The front of the house was bathed in a soft shade of gray. The trees swayed slowly as if dancing to the sound of the water. And the floor, already wet, reflected the interior lights with a humid, peaceful glow. I took a deep breath. The smell of rain is unmistakable. Wet earth, freshly washed leaves, damp wood. It was a smell that, for me, always had the taste of a new beginning. Maybe because, even if everything seemed the same after the rain stopped, something in the air and inside me always changed. I sat down in the chair at the end, the same one that creaked a little when I moved. And even now, even in this state where I no longer knew if it was memory or presence, it creaked. A sound almost imperceptible, but real, almost like a wave, as if to say, "You still belong here." I looked at the house. The lights inside cast soft shadows on the curtains. It was like looking into a home from the outside, but knowing that it had always been mine. It gave me peace, a strange peace, almost melancholy, but without sadness. In the rain, everything seems to slow down. The world breathes deeper. And so do we. I thought about all the times I was there, in that same chair, listening to that same rain. I thought about the times when, after a hard day, I would find refuge in that corner. And on the nights when, with my son sleeping in my arms, I would just listen to the sound of the falling water, feeling the weight of life dissolve. Rain has always been a comfort. Maybe that's why, at that moment, she came back. Not to warn me of anything, not to mark an end, but to remind me that even after everything, life follows its cycle. It wets, it cleans, it soothes. I stayed there for a long time, without thinking about anything specific, just letting the rain pass through me. And little by little, I realized that she was also falling inside me. It wet memories, washed silences, awakened smells that I didn't even remember existed. And, for the first time that day, I felt like falling asleep. I closed my eyes. The sound of the rain felt like a blanket, an old lap, a caress that requires no explanation. And maybe, right now, you're feeling it too. If you are listening to this story with headphones on, lying down, or with your head propped up, you may notice something in the background. A noise, a continuous sound. What sound calms you the most? Rain, sea, leaves, wind? Tell me in the comments. Perhaps sharing sounds is a way to create shelter in the ears and memories of others. After a while on the porch, I felt something calling me from outside. It wasn't a sound or a thought. It was more like an invisible gesture, like when someone lightly touches your shoulder without saying anything. But you understand. I got up from my chair calmly, feeling the breeze of the rain still hanging in the air. The drops had slowed, but the earth still breathed the freshness of something recently washed. I crossed the porch, went down the 2 damp wooden steps, carefully as I always did, and stepped into the garden. The wet grass gave way softly beneath my feet. A living carpet, a soil that recognized me. It was as if that ground, after so long sustaining me in life, now welcomed me in silence. Each step was an exchange. I touched the earth, and it gave me back memories. The garden was small, but full of history. A corner of the world where I had planted much more than flowers, where I played ball with my son, where I kissed my wife after a difficult conversation, where I buried, with discreet tears, our first cat, old Chico, who slept among the pots and disappeared for days. The plants were bigger than I remembered. Some of the flowers I had planted had given way to others. Nature is like that. It doesn't wait. It continues even without us. But it also remembers. And at that moment, I felt it. That even though it had changed, that garden still knew who I was. I stopped in front of the hibiscus. The crooked bush with its chubby leaves and unruly branches was my favorite. Every time I pruned it, it grew even more ungainly. But that was exactly what made it beautiful. I never wanted it to be perfect. I just wanted it to be there. And there he was. I touched a leaf lightly, and for a second, just a second, it moved. Not like the wind blows by, but like someone returning the touch, a response, a vegetable whisper saying, "You're back." I kept walking. I passed by the improvised vegetable garden where, years ago, we planted mint and rosemary. I remembered my son saying that mint smelled like Grandma's bath, and how he would rub his hands in the leaves to get the smell. I picked up a twig and brought it close to my face. The aroma was there, equal, intact, a time capsule in the form of perfume. I reached the tree at the back, the jabuticaba tree. Small, stubborn, but generous. For years it gave us unexpected fruits, almost like a miracle. And it was there, under it, that we sat on so many afternoons to talk without rushing. I touched the trunk. It was thicker, rougher, but firm. And there, carved with a pocket knife in crooked letters, was still the inscription I had made with my son. Father plus son. Always. A simple account, but eternal. I closed my eyes and let myself be carried away by that green, living, humid presence. The garden didn't just remind me of me. He welcomed me, not as someone who is gone, but as someone who never stopped being. Nature has this power, to keep pieces of us without charging anything, without changing what we were, just preserving. And then I understood, maybe even if life moves on, some places refuse to be forgotten. The garden was that place for me. A small altar of memory where nothing needed to be said, only felt. I took another deep breath. The air was pure, full of the scent of leaves, flowers, and earth. It was as if the world was saying to me, "You can rest now, it's okay." And maybe now you can do the same. Close your eyes. Imagine your garden, real or invented. A place that recognizes your footsteps even if they no longer touch the ground. Is there a place that seems to hold who you were even when you change? If you have a corner like this, tell me in the comments. Sometimes, the memory of a space is all we need to rediscover who we were, and who we still are. I walked slowly back into the house, my feet still a little damp from the grass. The wood of the floor felt warmer now, closer, as if she had also felt the rain. My footsteps remained soundless, not from absence, but from lightness. It was like walking inside a dream that had already been lived, and that now only wants to be remembered with tenderness. I walked through the hallway and entered the room again. The late afternoon light filtered through the curtains in golden beams, turning the dust in the air into tiny, motionless fireflies. Everything there seemed frozen in time, but not in the sense of abandonment, but rather of respect, as if the home wanted to save every moment in glass. It was then that my eyes fell on the bookshelf. It was in the corner near the armchair where I read before going to sleep. A simple bookshelf, but full of stories. Some books were tilted, others stacked like crooked towers, and in the middle of it all, there it was, the photo album. It wasn't new. The leather cover already showed signs of age, and the edges were slightly worn. But still, he seemed steady, as if bravely resisting the awe, passing of days as if he were a guardian. I approached. I ran my fingers over the spine, feeling the familiar texture. The leather, though old, seemed to recognize my presence. Carefully, I pulled the album from the shelf and placed it on the coffee table. I sat in front of it and took a deep breath. It was like opening a capsule, a shrine of memories. The first page was one of my favorites. My wife and I, still young, hugging in front of the gate of our old house. The sky was cloudy, her hair tied up with a pencil, and me, with that crooked smile of someone who didn't really know what she was doing, but was happy. So happy. I turned the page gently. There was the birth of our son. That first photo where his eyes were barely open, and yet they seemed to say, "I have arrived." I remembered the smell of the maternity ward, the butterflies in my stomach, the lump in my throat, the exact moment when my heart became home. I continued browsing. Each page, a whole life. First steps, first vacation, birthdays with crooked balloons and tilted cakes, afternoons in the park, that trip where everything went wrong, and yet it was perfect. And then the ordinary days, the simple meals, the glances exchanged between plates and cutlery, the little miracles of routine. The images didn't speak, but I heard everything. Her laugh, the sound of feet running across the floor, the sound of the spoon hitting the glass, and most importantly, the sound of love, who never shouts but always makes himself heard. My eyes stopped on a special photo. It was a black and white photo. I was sitting on the stairs with my son on my lap, and we were both smiling at something outside the frame. That photo had no date, but it didn't need to. It was an eternal image, a memory that never fades, even when memory fails. I closed the album with affection, not because I wanted to end that moment, but because I knew it was already inside me. Every photo, every expression, every detail, all of that no longer lived on paper. It lived inside me, and it always would. The bookshelf seemed to smile as it received the album back, as if knowing that the visit is over, but that the visitor can return whenever they want. I stood up calmly, my chest fuller than before, full of soft memories, full of gratitude. And maybe now, when you hear my voice, you will also think of your memories. Do you have an album, physical or mental, that holds what really matters? Maybe an image that defines you, a moment that shaped you, a person who, just by looking at you, still hugs you. If you want, share it in the comments. Sometimes, sharing a memory is like opening a page in your album for someone to see what you never had the courage to show. I left the room in silence, like someone closing a book slowly, careful not to wake up the words. My steps, still floating, continued towards the upper floor. There was something there that called, an unspoken memory, a part of the story that still needed to be told. I passed through the hallway with its old paintings, now illuminated by a softer, almost golden light. Each frame seemed like a portal. But what I was looking for was not hanging on the wall. It was hidden away. Hidden. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of habit. I entered the small office. The place was cramped, but full of soul. A desk leaning against the wall, shelves with books that were no longer opened often, dried pens inside a glass cup, and the familiar smell of paper stored for too long. It was a space that belonged more to memory than to function. And at that moment, that was exactly what I needed. I approached the middle drawer. Inside, among old bill papers, Christmas cards, and unframed photographs, there it was, the letter. I recognized the fold. The yellowed envelope, the lyrics in the corner, written in a hurry, but full of feeling. It was my handwriting. It was my letter. The letter I wrote and never delivered. I picked it up with both hands. She was light, but weighed strangely. As if carrying everything that was never said, everything that was left between the lines of a busy life, of days that passed without warning. I opened it calmly. The paper cracked with a soft sound. The words written in blue pen were still. Clear, no erasures, no corrections, because that day I wrote with all my heart. Love, if one day you are reading this, it is because something inside me felt it was time to write. Maybe for fear of forgetting. Maybe for fear of leaving without leaving these words. Sometimes I look at you and forget to tell you how much you've changed my life. How much of a better man I am because of your patience, your quiet strength, your way of turning ordinary days into something important. And our son. Oh, our boy. If I could freeze a moment, it would be the one in which he hugs me for no reason. Without fear, just because he sees me coming. I don't know if I was always there the way you deserved, but I swear I always tried. Even in the mistakes, even in the silences, thank you for letting me live this story with you. If time passes and I'm no longer there to say all this out loud, I hope these words reach me with all the love I could carry you. I closed my eyes. I let the words embrace me like a blanket of memories. I felt every sentence as if it was being read for the first time. And maybe it really was, because now everything took on a new meaning, a new truth. I held the letter against my chest. I stood there, silent. No tears fell, no regrets filled me. Only the certainty that, even though it had not been delivered, that letter had already fulfilled its purpose. She had reminded me of what really matters. Maybe that's why I never gave it to her. Maybe because, somehow, I knew that it would only be read at the right time. And now, in the silence of the house, with the rain having stopped and night slowly approaching, I felt that that time had come. I put the letter away again, but in a new place, on the table, visible, present, like a message left in the wind, as a last note for those who still walk. And now I ask you, with affection and without haste, have you ever written something that you never had the courage to deliver? Letter, a message, even a sentence that has been stuck for days or years? If you want, share in the comments. Sometimes giving voice to what has never been said is the most beautiful way to turn silence into healing. I left the office with the lightness of someone who has just let go of an old weight. The letter, even though it had never been delivered, now seemed to hang in the air as if it had finally fulfilled its destiny, to be felt. The hallway seemed darker now, but not for lack of light. It was as if the house was starting to close its eyes too, like someone dozing off before night falls completely. An even deeper silence took over everything, and this silence guided me like an old companion. My feet naturally took me to the bedroom door, that intimate space that, even empty, still carries the breath of memories. I pushed the door slowly. The room was as I left it. Nothing in excess, nothing lacking, just the essentials. The half-open curtains let in a soft, bluish light. The bedspread on the bed still bore the marks of its last rest. The pillows were sagging, and the air had that mingled smell of soap, skin, and time. There, everything was still pulsating. I entered without making a sound, even though silence had already reigned. I approached the bed and sat on the edge, in the same place as always. The mattress sank slightly under my weight, as if it still recognized me. as if to say, "You're back." I looked around. The nightstand still had my favorite book on it. It was marked on page 117, where I had stopped so many times either because I was sleepy or distracted. There was also a small picture frame with a photo of my wife smiling in a way that she only smiled in very spontaneous moments. That picture was my favorite. I touched the sheet with my fingertips. It was cold. But the cold was sweet, not frightening. It was the kind of cold that lulls you to rest, that invites you to retreat. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the room as if it were a living body. It was at that moment that the images came. Not like a movie, but like flashes of moments, me opening the windows on Sunday mornings, my wife lying down, looking at me with that "just 5 more minutes" look. My son running into bed to jump on the bed. The 3 of us curled up under the blanket on rainy days. The conversations before bed, the complicit silences, the plans whispered in the dark. There, more than anywhere else in the house, was where the soul rested. I touched the pillow. I lay down carefully, as if my body remembered exactly where it fit. And there, looking up at the ceiling, I felt a strange completeness. I was missing nothing. Not a body, not a presence, not a word. The house knew, the room knew, and I, too, understood that death, if that is what it was, does not come as an end. It comes as an empty room that still breathes the smell of who you were. It comes as a space that, even after you leave, continues to say, "Here you were happy." And perhaps, this is eternity, being remembered in details that will not fade. I lay there for an indefinite amount of time. My eyes were half closed. My heart was calm. My chest was full of images that didn't require haste. Everything was in the right place. Even though, outside, the world kept changing. And now, maybe you can do the same. Take a deep breath. Imagine your room, the one that welcomes you, the one that, even in silence, seems to listen to you. What object in your room carries the most memories? A pillow? A book? An old piece of furniture? Share in the comments. Sometimes telling about where you sleep is telling about where you were most yourself. The silence in the room was not absolute. There was a sound there, a sound that came neither from outside nor from inside. It was as if time itself was breathing between the walls. A subtle presence that manifested itself in small noises that only the soul knows how to recognize. Lying there, weightless, bodiless, I let my mind wander. And that's when the sounds started to emerge. First, almost imperceptibly, the sound of tiny footsteps in the hallway. Those quick, disorderly steps that only a child knows how to do. I remembered the sound my son made running barefoot, his heels tapping like little drums on the wooden floor. It was a unique melody, a sound of life. Then I heard laughter. Muffled, embarrassed laughter, the kind that comes in the middle of the night, between sleep and dream. It was my wife laughing at something silly I had said, probably trying to be funny after a tiring day. The kind of laughter that doesn't need a reason to exist. It just happens and fills the room with warmth, and then I heard my own voice, not as a recording, not as an echo. It was a sound memory, a simple sentence, "Good night, my loves," said so many times with minimal variations, sometimes more firmly, other times more sleepy, but always with the same weight, that of a man who knew that his home was at peace. These sounds, coming from who knows where, did not scare anyone. On the contrary, they were like beloved visitors. As if, for a few minutes, time had decided to take a step back and let me hear again what was important. The sounds of silverware hitting the sink, the zipper of a backpack being hastily closed, the click of a microwave, the television playing low late at night, the click of a door being locked, the sound of wind pushing the curtains. Each of them was a fragment of my existence, the little details that, in the end, make up an entire life. I realized, lying there, that the past does not disappear. It only changes form. What was once an image becomes a sound. What was once a sound becomes a sensation. What was once a routine becomes a memory. And then I heard the most unexpected sound of all, crying, soft, restrained. It was my son, crying softly, perhaps in his own room, perhaps somewhere in the midst of longing. That cry of a child who doesn't scream, who just lets the tears flow in silence, with his face hidden in the pillow. The kind of cry that we know even from afar. I got up slowly. I followed the sound as if following an invisible thread. The whole house was plunged into a dense silence, but there, in that hidden corner of the night, there was a small soul pouring out longing. I reached the door to his room. It was ajar. The blue nightlight illuminated his face. His eyes were closed, but contracted. His body was curled up, and even while he was sleeping, he was crying. I knelt down beside the bed. I lightly touched the quilt. I stood there, just present. He knew he couldn't be seen or heard, but still, he knew he was doing something. It was as if my presence, even subtle, still had the power to comfort. And then something happened. He took a deep breath, as if he felt something in the air. His face relaxed. His eyes stopped squinting. The crying stopped, and he whispered, almost soundlessly, "Right." The word hung in the air, as if hovering above the two of us, as if it echoed throughout the house. There, I understood everything. The sounds of the past are not distant echoes. They are roots. They are presences that refuse to go away. They are voices that continue to call us, even when the world thinks we are silent. And now, maybe you also remember a sound. Is there a sound that still lives in you? A laugh, a voice, a phrase said at the right moment, or at the final moment? If you want, share in the comments. Sometimes when someone hears our most intimate sound, it comes back into existence for the world. I returned from my son's room as if I were returning from a sacred place. Each step was slow, loaded not with weight, but with meaning. I felt like I had touched something profound, something that no longer needed to be explained. And perhaps, for the first time since I woke up in that suspended silence, a part of me began to understand. This was not a dream. It was a moment of passage, and there was no sadness in it. It was as if finally, everything was finding its place. Not like rigid pieces of a puzzle, but like leaves that fall to the ground and effortlessly settle there, naturally, noiseless, no urgency. I sat down on the porch once more, now with the sky darker and the lights in the house more timid. The night was approaching slowly, like a tame animal, and everything seemed ready to welcome it. I closed my eyes, I took a deep breath, and you feel. I felt like I no longer needed to understand everything. No need to go back, no need to run away, no need to ask why. There was something bigger, going on, something that didn't require answers, just presence. The night breeze was cool but comforting, the kind of cold that doesn't push away, but welcomes. Like the breeze on the edge of a calm lake, like the sheets in a room prepared with care. At that moment, I realized that everything I had experienced, every scene, every memory, every smell and sound, was leading me to this point, the moment of acceptance. Accepting is not giving up. It's not forgetting. Acceptance is saying, it was real, and it was beautiful. And now I can let go without fear. The longing still existed, but it wasn't a cut anymore. It was a silent presence, an invisible thread that connected me to everything I was and always will be within those who loved me. I understood that even though I was absent, I remained. In my son's laughter, in my wife's gestures, in the words I left, in the silences I inhabited, in the simple things in the house, the crooked chair, the unfinished book, the smell of coffee that still lives on the walls, I understood that love doesn't need a body to continue. And at that moment, I felt a warmth inside my chest, a soft light that did not come from outside, nor from above, but from within. It was like a candle burning right in the center of my soul, firm, serene. Little by little, the house also seemed to accept it. The shadows became softer, the air warmer, everything gathered together as if the entire house was preparing to sleep with me. And in that gathering, there was respect, there was love. I looked inside once more, the room with its low light, the shelf with the album now more visible. The plate was still on the table, which no one had the courage to put away, and the letter, my letter, lying with dignity on the desk. Nothing needed to be changed. Nothing needed to be said. Everything had already been lived, and now, finally, he could rest. I closed my eyes. For real, for the first time that day. And I didn't see darkness. I saw an open field, a sky full of stars, a light breeze, and a distant sound, maybe a boy's laughter. Or the whisper of a love that never left. And now I ask you, in the midst of this calm, have you ever felt that moment when, without understanding exactly how, you just accepted it? Have you accepted loss, time, absence, or even love? If you want, share in the comments. Sometimes the acceptance of one heart can light the path of many. The night was now complete. The sky, dark as an ancient cloak, stretched over the house with an almost divine calm. Not a single star shone brightly. They were just there. Small, constant presences, as if they were waiting for the world to fall asleep before they began to watch. The house, inside, was also already asleep. Every room, every object, every wall seemed to have found rest, as if the soul of the home had exhaled a long, deep sigh, and now dreamed. And there I was, still awake, feeling it was time. Time for one last lap. Time for a simple gesture. A gesture that was perhaps the most important of all. I got up from the porch chair and walked through the front door. The wood didn't creak. The hallway light was already off. Everything was dim, but I knew every corner, every step. I didn't need to see. I just needed to feel. I walked up the stairs one last time. I entered the room with the lightness of a breeze. My wife was sleeping. Her face turned towards the window, her hair loose on the pillow, the calm breathing of someone who, even without knowing it, feels that everything is where it should be. There was a peace in her expression, a serenity that did not come from ordinary sleep. It was something deeper. As if, even without my physical presence, she had found shelter. I approached slowly. I knelt down beside the bed, as if praying, as if giving thanks. I stood there for a while without counting, just looking, just being. And then I did what I had, perhaps put off until that moment. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. A kiss without lips, without touch, an invisible but full kiss. A gesture that crosses everything, time, matter, pain. A kiss that says, thanks. I love you. You may continue. She didn't move, but a slight, almost imperceptible smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. I don't know if it was real. I don't know if it was a dream. But it was. I got up slowly, still with the taste of silence on my lips. I left the room and went to our son's room. He was sleeping on his stomach, the pillow crumpled under his head, his toys scattered across the bed as if they had fallen with him. So small, so whole. I approached him in the same way, without rushing, without weight. I knelt down, I watched, and I kissed him too, on the head. A different kiss, of protection, of blessing, a kiss that said, "You are more than you imagine. I will be with you, even when you don't know it." And again, there was something. A movement in his body, a sigh, a slight opening of his hand as if trying to hold something in the air, and then calm. I went back to the hallway. I stopped for a moment. Between the two rooms, I looked both ways. At the two loves of my life, and I felt in my chest not the pain of farewell, but the fullness of surrender. It was time. Time to let time move on. Time to let them go. Because now everything was at peace, and maybe, if you are here with me right now, listening to these words in the darkness of your own room, you can understand what I am saying. The last kiss, even if invisible, is the one that remains forever. If you've ever had to say goodbye with a gesture that no one saw, but that you still feel, share it in the comments. Sometimes, telling about a kiss that didn't get applause is like giving that kiss all over again. I went down the stairs for the last time as if I wasn't returning, but was concluding. My footsteps didn't touch the ground, or maybe the ground didn't need to be touched anymore. The house was now like a dream that was slowly fading away, not because it was forgotten, but because it had already been fully lived. And that's how everything should be. Smooth, no noise, no rush. The clock still read 2:47. The kitchen was dark, but welcoming. The smell of dinner had already disappeared, replaced by that neutral aroma of clean dishes and the arrival of night. The cup on the sink seemed to be looking at me, like an old friend saying goodbye with a short but meaningful wave. I walked through the room slowly. The light there was different. No longer the morning sun, nor the darkness of the dark night. It was the evening light, the kind that turns everything an aged gold. The kind of light that doesn't last long, but which, for that very reason, is even more beautiful. As if to say, look, I'm only here for now, but look how intense I am. This light came in through the windows, passing through the curtains, and dancing on the floor like golden dust. It was as if the house was breathing softly, accepting the passage of time with gratitude. I approached the bookshelf. The photo album was still there, intact, silent, and next to it, the letter. The sheet of paper no longer seemed fragile. Now she stood on the wood like a landmark, like something that no longer needed to be hidden, as an assumed memory. And then, the evening light touched that letter. He lit it like someone lighting an altar. And there, I understood something profound. The end of a life is not a closure. It is a transition, a sunset. It is not the sudden extinguishing of the light, but its softening, its change of tone. It is when the day does not disappear. It turns into night, and even in the night, there are still stars. I approached the window. Outside, the sky was at its most beautiful. A muted gradient of blues and oranges, a painting hand painted by time itself. The trees swayed in a calm rhythm. The whole world seemed suspended between one cycle and another, and in that moment, everything made sense. I sat down in the armchair, for the last time, facing that sky that embraced me in color and silence. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, and he said, not out loud but inside, I'm ready. And perhaps you who are with me until now also feel this way. Perhaps there is something inside you that needs to accept the beauty of sunset, not as an end, but as a transition. Do you remember any goodbye that didn't hurt because it was too beautiful? If you want, share in the comments. Sometimes talking about sunset helps other people not to fear the night. I got up from the armchair with my body feeling lighter than ever. The evening light began to dissolve into the first shadows of night, and for a brief moment, everything was suspended. like when the last chord of a song echoes in the air before disappearing completely. The house, now quiet, no longer seemed to need me. It breathed on its own. It had absorbed every memory, every word, every absence. Everything was in its right place, even the silence. I went to the front door. I touched the doorknob carefully, like someone saying goodbye to an old friend. She gave in easily. The door opened without creaking. The outside air entered like an invitation. And then I saw it. In front of the house, there was no longer the usual street, nor the neighbors' walls, nor the lampposts, the cars, or the familiar trees. In place of all this was a vast, flat field, shrouded in a soft mist, a field that didn't scare, that didn't call, that just existed. It was not an end-time scenario. It was a space of transition. No signs, no rush, no exact direction. A place where time had no voice and space had no name. And yet, I knew that was my next step. My feet touched the ground softly. The grass was soft, warm, almost alive. The sky above was neither clear nor dark. It was something in between. A diffuse light, like the one before a dream. I walked. No destination, weightless. With the serene soul of someone who no longer carries the body as an obligation, but as a memory. And yet I felt it. I felt the light wind passing by me. I felt a gentle presence accompanying me. Something or someone was walking with me. Maybe it was the memories. Maybe it was all the hugs I gave. Maybe it was God. The field had no end, but it didn't need to have one either. Because I wasn't walking to arrive. I was walking to dissolve, to integrate, to finally rest, not like someone fleeing, but like someone finding shelter. And with each step, a certainty grew within me. Emptiness is not absence. It is space. It is the place where everything can be born again. I sat on a smooth stone in the middle of the field. Alone, but complete. No anguish, no doubt, just presence, and the soft sound of the wind or of the soul. It was no longer possible to distinguish. I looked back, and you're at home, small now, far away, but still standing, still alive, still full. I saw my wife, sitting on the couch, reading a book, her eyes a little moist. I saw my son, sleeping, hugging his pillow, mumbling meaningless words, but which deep down said my name. And then I stopped looking. I turned my eyes to the field. I took one last breath, not like someone saying goodbye, but as if resting. And now, maybe you're ready for it too. Not to disappear, but to quiet down, to walk, even if only in thought, through this field without haste, without pressure, without voice. If you could walk across this field right now, what would you leave behind? If you want, share in the comments. Sometimes writing down what you leave behind is the best way to remember what is still worth carrying. Continued to sit on that smooth stone, my gaze resting on nothing. But the nothingness was not dark. It wasn't scary. It was calm, a type of peace that has no color or shape, but that spreads throughout everything, like air, like the presence of something very ancient that knows us better than we know ourselves. The field in front of me continued without defined contours. The edges of the world seemed erased, like a painting made with water. And the sky no longer had clouds. It was just a diffuse blanket, like an infinite breath. It was then that I felt it, the wind. It didn't come from any specific direction. It didn't hit hard. It just reached out. It touched my face as if it were acknowledging me, as if it were saying, "You're ready." I closed my eyes, and at that moment, the wind whispered, not in words, but in feelings. Not in sentences, but in memories. It was as if every memory I had ever experienced gently dissolved in the breeze. One by one, the faces, the places, the smells, the laughter, everything floated around me, not as images, but as vibrations. The whisper of the wind told me, without a voice, "You have been seen, you were loved, you belonged, and now you can rest." And I believed. I believed because there was no more room for doubt, because within me there was no longer any need to stay. It was not giving up, it was absolute acceptance, a hug so big that it didn't need arms. The wind continued, it touched my skin, or what had become my skin, and wrapped itself around me like a cloak of farewell. But not a sad farewell, a sweet farewell. The kind that you know is not the end, just a change of shape. At that moment, I started to feel different, lighter, more ethereal, as if every part of me was gently falling apart, returning to what I was before I was someone. As if the wind wasn't just whispering to me, but taking me with it. And I went, not with your feet, not with the body, but with the essence. I went with the wind, as do the good smells that live in the sheets. How are the words we say in our sleep? How the last note of a song goes, and in that silent movement, I understood what it meant to remain. It wasn't about being there physically. It was about being in the details, in the smells, in the sounds, in the choices, in the memories, in gentle absences. The wind took me for a moment that lasted forever. And then, everything was peaceful. And maybe now, if you're still here with me, listening to this last breath of history, you'll close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Feel the air around you. What does he whisper to you now? If you want, share in the comments. Sometimes what the wind says to you may be exactly what someone needed to hear. I don't remember exactly the moment I stopped being there. There was no cut, no dramatic goodbye. It was more like the slow extinguishing of a candle that has already fulfilled its function to illuminate. The wind, the one that whispered everything that needed to be said, was now silent as well. And me? I was part of it. I felt myself floating between the sky and the field, and then between the invisible things. The sound of the trees, the warmth of the earth, the memory of a voice. There was no longer any body, no thought, just rest. Rest that no longer requires dreaming, a rest that simply, and it was like sleeping deeply, but with your eyes open, like coming home after a long trip, like lying on someone's lap who no longer has to ask if you're okay. I felt everything. But I no longer thought in words. Everything was feeling, presence, harmony. No pain, no longing, because in that new place there was no absence. Nothing was missing. The feeling was like being a child again, but not a child who runs or plays, a sleeping child, with arms loose, with a clean heart, with the whole world around. In silence, and that's how I found what I had been looking for my whole life. Peace. That peace that does not come from what we achieve, but from what we accept. That peace that doesn't need to be explained, because it is felt. That peace that doesn't need sound, because silence speaks. And if you're still here with me, if your eyelids are heavy, if your chest is breathing slower, if your body has found a more peaceful way to lie down, maybe you felt some of this too. This calm place where voices are lowered, where thoughts are withdrawn, and all that's left is what really matters. Presence, eternity, rest. Now I sleep. Not because I'm tired, but because I'm complete. And I leave you with this last breath in the form of words. Everything you love continues, Even if it changes, even if you go, even if the world says it's over, everything you love lives in you. Forever. Good night. Sleep well. And if, when you wake up, you remember this story, tell me in the comments, which part did you take with you to the dream? Sometimes a simple answer is what turns a memory into eternity.